The title slide shows the Washington State University logo. Text reads, "Make your charts and graphs accessible." Tuesday, March 17, 2026. A small video of the presenter, Sarah Schaub, is in the top right corner.
All right. Yes, I'm going to continue to share. Okay, well, welcome everyone. My name is Sarah Schaub. I'm the Web Services Manager here at Connors, and this is our monthly digital accessibility webinar. Today, we're going to focus on how to make your charts and graphs accessible.
A slide titled Training Objectives appears with a bulleted list.
And today's training objectives are to understand the importance of accessible design of graphs and charts, discuss solutions for common errors, and learn best practices for creating alternative text.
A slide titled Why Accessibility Matters appears with a bulleted list.
So I just want to start off by briefly discussing why accessibility matters. Designing accessible charts and graphs ensure everyone, including people with disabilities, have full access to presented information. Making your charts and graphs accessible supports compliance with current laws and standards like the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, the Washington State User O1 policy, and ADA guidelines. And also creating accessible content demonstrates our commitment to access for all, which is really important.
A slide titled Examples of Charts and Graphs lists different chart types.
So examples of charts and graphs, as many of you probably already know, are bar graphs, line graphs, pie charts, Venn diagrams, flow charts, maps with data. This presentation specifically is going to focus more on bar graphs, line graphs, and pie charts. Those are the ones that I have more examples to share today.
A slide titled Keep Designs Simple provides a bulleted list of best practices.
So it's really important to start by keeping your design simple. The more simple you keep your design, the easier it is to make it accessible. And we'll provide lots of examples in this presentation today. So you want to keep your charts and graphs simple, break complex data into multiple visuals, use visuals to support the message. You want to make sure to include data tables when it's helpful. Use clear descriptive titles, label all your axes, place legends close to the data, and provide exact values when possible.
A slide titled Content Placement offers tips with examples for arranging chart elements.
Content placement is really important. You want to make sure you use descriptive titles for your images, graphs, and charts. An example would be using a title Enrollment by County 2024 instead of a title like Chart 1. Link or reference information that appears in multiple formats. An example would be see Table 2 for exact values, or you could link to an appendix for more information. Make sure to arrange your content from top to bottom and left to right. That is how most screen readers will read your information, so that's really important. And then try to avoid directional phrases. I'm not always very good at this, but an example would be use the bar chart shows instead of graph on the right. So providing directional information can sometimes be problematic.
A slide titled Design Legends 1 shows an incorrect example of a bar chart where the legend is in columns at the bottom, making it hard to read.
Okay, so this first example is showcasing design of legends, and it's an incorrect example. The bar goes from left to right, and the legend that shows up at the bottom of the bar chart has columns. So, whoops. I just jumped forward. So this is not an accessible example for a couple of reasons. One, having this under the axis title where you have the series of the columns where it says Series 1, Series 2, and Series 3, it's hard to differentiate where that is referring to on the chart because there's columns. They're not three in a row, and they're not clearly labeling the bars themselves underneath each category. So that's going to be confusing to a user.
A slide titled Design, Legends, 2, shows a correct example of a bar chart with the legend at the top and individual labels on each bar for clarity.
So this next slide shows the correct example of how you could provide this information, including information in the legend. So at the top is the chart title. Then I've properly labeled the Series 1, Series 2, and Series 3. And that is also replicated on each bar underneath each category. So it clearly labels each one of the bars in the bar graph of what it correlates to regarding series. So that would be an accessible example. And this would be accessible even without any color added to it. Any user would be able to understand this information because it's so clearly labeled.
A slide titled Color Contrast Requirements lists key principles.
So color contrast requirements, don't use color alone to convey meaning. It should never be the only way you show meaning. You should always add text, labels, patterns, or symbols. And we'll provide some examples of this. You want to make sure to make your text easy to read. Text needs to have strong contrast with the background, so it's easy to read for people with vision challenges. And I'm going to give you a couple of resources that are really going to help you accomplish this. There's a great color contrast analyzer tool that I use that has a dropper tool that you can just easily check the contrast of your images. And we'll give some examples here shortly. Make charts and visuals easy to see. So for lines, bars, icons, and other chart elements, they need to have enough contrast so that the key information stands out.
A slide titled Color Alone details what to check, common examples of misuse, and best practices.
Color alone, a little bit more information on this. It must not be the only way you convey information, indicate actions or prompt responses, or distinguish visual elements. So what you need to check with your charts and graphs, you need to look at the legend for your graphs and charts. If the color is the only difference between items, then you're using color alone to convey meaning. This also applies to text and links. So we never want to just use color alone to convey text or links for emphasis. Common examples of color alone use. Updates are highlighted. So if you're only highlighting the text, then you're just using color alone to emphasize the text. Another way to do that would be to also make it bolded and highlighted. Then you're using two different techniques in order to emphasize the text. Another example would be numbers in red are negative, and if you only had the numbers in red, somebody with color blindness might not be able to understand. So again, you would either need to add another element for visual distinction, whether it be bolded or emphasis, or italics. And then links that rely on color alone. So I'm sure many of you have seen this as an example on websites or in a document where the text is just a different color and it doesn't include an underline. Best practice is to always include an underline with links. And for nothing else. So stay away from underlining text unless it's a link. That's another common issue that we see. So best practices, always pair color with text, symbols, patterns, or formatting. And for links, add an underline or bold action to the color.
A slide titled Color and Charts displays 3 pie charts, one in black and white, one using only color, and an accessible version with labels and percentages directly on each slice.
So on this slide, I've got some examples. Got to get my zoom bar out of the way here so I can see what I'm doing. Color and charts. So it's really important to not just use color alone because the chart will not be understood without the proper labels. So I have a sales chart using color alone. It's just broken up into first, second, third, and fourth quarter. No additional information is given, and it's all in black. So that doesn't really tell the user the kind of information that they need in order to discern what is in this chart. I have another sales chart example that uses color alone on the bottom left corner, where it's just giving color for the first quarter. If somebody had color blindness, again, they would not understand the difference in the color of each one of these quarters. And then I have provided an accessible chart that includes the use of color but it also includes text labels for each one of the sections of the pie chart that include the percentage as well as the quarter. And so if that was the way that you labeled your information, then you would not necessarily need to meet the color contrast. You need, because you're doing more than just providing color, you're including several other elements to help discern the text or the chart. I'm sorry.
A slide titled Pattern Legends shows a pie chart using different patterns for each slice. Next to it are two screenshots of a color contrast analyzer tool.
Okay, so pattern, my goodness, sorry, my Zoom bar keeps popping in my way here. Pattern legend. So be sure legend icons are large enough to identify the pattern. Oh, I think I skipped a slide, did I? Nope, I guess not. So a way that you can create differentiation in your charts is to use patterns. So you can use color along with patterns, but you have to make sure that the color contrast is sufficient between the foreground and the background color. You also need to ensure that your legend that shows up clearly shows the pattern within the legend. So on the bottom of this pie chart example, I have first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, and there's a little icon next to it that shows the pattern used for that quarter. So I've enlarged the text on this particular example so that it can be seen if somebody, for example, might have low vision. So on the next to this chart, I've got a couple of screenshots of this really great tool that I use. It's the Color Contrast Analyzer. It is the dropper tool, color contrast tool I was sharing with you earlier. I will provide you with a link, and at the end, I'm also going to, or throughout the presentation, give you a couple of demonstrations of how you can use the little dropper to identify the colors. So if you were to use, for example, the foreground color was red and the background color was black. So if you had black dots on a red background, for example, for your pattern, you would fail the color contrast ratio that's required. And the nice thing about this color analyzer tool is that it gives you the web content or the WCAG results at the bottom of the page, and it'll tell you if you pass based on multiple different criteria that must be met. So we're required to meet the minimum contrast requirement, the 1.4.3 AA, and then also 1.4.11, the non-text contrast AA. And so the example on the right with the foreground and background color being black and red, it fails both of those. So it's a really great tool. You can use it for anything that you're working on. Free to download, and I'll give you the link. So color alone solution. So there's some things that you can do if you're using color alone that will improve or make your content accessible. Adding labels to the chart. You can leave the color as it is, all solid with no pattern. A solution to make that accessible would be to either include a table that also has the same data, or create a narrative in the text that it accurately explains the data within that chart. So include the same information. And then the actual pie chart becomes supplemental and isn't necessarily required to be accessible on its own. So I've provided an example of a table that includes the quarter and the sales information that would satisfy that requirement or be a solution for this. Or you could use text, something like the sales for the first quarter were 8.2, second quarter 3.2, third quarter 1.4, and fourth quarter 1.2. That would also, so if that text narrative was included next to the pie chart, then that would satisfy the accessibility requirement for that chart. So labels are really important. You want to make sure you check whether the chart is understandable without color. So I have an example of the chart. I've used it a couple times. Sales chart that has first, second, third, and fourth quarter broken up. just by color. There's no additional information other than color, and then text that it's a quarter. And then below that is an example of a sales chart that has the quarter along with a number identified. And the one below it makes sense because you're including the data along with the quarter for each pie slice, and you don't need color to change the meaning. So if it can be understood without color being applied, then it's accessible on its own. So color contrast ratio, this is something that we talk about a lot. There are specific ratio requirements for the WCAG, and I'll get into that here in a second. But essentially, the higher the first number, the higher the contrast ratio is. And I've got some examples here in a table. The first example is, is white and red. So if the first color is white and the second color is red, that ratio would be 7.7 to 1. That would pass in most cases, and we'll get into it a little bit more about what the exact ratio requirements are depending on font size and what you're using. And so red on red would be a 1-to-1 ratio. Obviously, that would not be accessible. Green and red, it looks like I don't have green there, I have white. But if I did have my green there, I don't know how that got changed. It would have been 4.8 to 1 ratio. And then purple and red is actually considered a 1-to-1 ratio as well, so would not be accessible. So the WCAG requirement that I'm referring to regarding color contrast is known as 1.4.3. I don't expect you to memorize that. We are required to meet the AA requirement. So for regular text that is less than 14-point font or bold 18-point regular font, and then large text, which is greater than 14-point bold text or 18-point regular. In chart titles, legend text, data text, all of those different axis labels that you might have in a chart or graph, they have to also meet specific color contrast requirements. And the ratio for that is 4.5 to 1 for regular text if it's less than 14-point font, bold, or if it's 18-point font regular. And I've provided examples of what that looks like in this text box here, and I'll go over that in a second. And then a ratio of 3.1 or 3 to 1 for large text that's greater than 14-point font bold or 18-point font regular. So I've got some examples here. I've got black on red text. It fails at all font sizes because the color contrast ratio is not sufficient. It does not meet the 4.5 to 1 ratio that's required. White on red passes at all font sizes. And pink on red passes at large font size of 18-point font regular. And it also passes at the large font sizes of 14-point bold, but it fails on the pink and red. And I'll show you how this color contrast analyzer tool works here in a little bit and how you can easily check that for these different font sizes. Okay, color contrast text failure examples. So the black text on white passes color requirements. I have a sales color failure chart here. It's using green, blue, yellow, red for different quarters. The fourth quarter and the third quarter are labeled with black text over the white background, but the second quarter and the first quarter are in black text over dark color, and those two pie slices do not meet the color contrast ratio. So I've provided screenshots of what the ratio actually is with the black text over the dark blue, and it's 2.3 to 1. And the color contrast analyzer shows me under the WCAG results that everything fails that's checked against the WCAG requirements. The same thing applies to almost everything with the black text on the dark green. It does pass at the large text size, and it does pass at the non-text contrast size, but it fails at the regular text and large text sizes. So again, sometimes some things will pass and some things might not pass. That's why it's really important to make sure you're always checking and using high contrast, which can be a challenge when you are working with brand guidelines and certain color palettes. And so that's where the supplemental using a table or that narrative can come in handy and really be helpful. So some color contrast solutions, changing the colors, which I just mentioned might be difficult sometimes. Moving the text outside of the chart, next to the chart, that would probably be what I would do. So one of the examples, the cells change colors. The third example has the black text over a white background, just pointing to each pie chart, or add a data table, like we've shown in previous examples. And I've got a couple more examples coming up here as well for that. So color contrast for non-text elements. Non-text elements such as symbols or icons should have a contrast ratio of 3:1 against nearby colors to ensure clarity. Some examples include the color of your bar chart against the background, color of your line charts, color of your lines that overlap, color of stacked bar charts that touch, color of where pie charts touch, lines in a line graph, borders on a map, bars of a bar graph, pieces of a pie chart, symbols and icons. And we've got some good examples coming up here so you can see what I'm talking about. Okay, so here is an example of a pie chart for non-text failures. So all touching colors need to have a 3:1 ratio. That's important to remember for bar graphs, pie charts, anything that you're using color. So I've provided a poor example here. And this example has several kind of muted, lighter tones. If you have good vision, you can see the difference in the colors. It's like a beigey pink and then more of a tan, a lighter tan, and then kind of a grayish color for the first, second, third, and fourth quarters. And so when you test those color contrasts next to each other, so I have provided some screenshots on the slide of some examples using the color contrast analyzer where you want to test each of the colors next to each other. And if they don't meet the 3:1 ratio, then they do not pass the color contrast. So I've provided examples of all of the colors next to each other. None of them pass because the colors are too muted. Checking them next to each quarter that's adjacent to it on the pie chart. Oops. Was that the right one? Yes, I needed to go forward. Okay, so non-text color solutions are changing the colors of the categories. Again, sometimes that's not always an option, or adding borders. So adding a border around all of the different sections can be helpful. Adding data tables, always a really good extra solution. I always encourage that step. That will make the image then supplemental, and it would not necessarily then need to be accessible. So the quickest fix, like I just mentioned, adding a data table. So below the example, the sales added with borders, I've added a quarter or a table that includes the quarter and the sales information. So just adding that table alone makes it so that your pie chart is then considered an alternative format, and you don't need to make any changes to it. It increases the usability for all users, reduces alternative text creation for supplemental images. And then you can just create a short reference. For example, you can say pie chart of 2024 sales, exact data is included in the text. That would satisfy the requirement. And all in all, whenever you present the information data in a table, it's a better user experience for somebody using a screen reader. So color exceptions, supplemental images, images that are not essential for understanding or are explained in the text of the document. Supplemental colors, is it labeled in a way that makes the color supplemental? Logos do not need to pass color contrast ratio. That's a common question that we get. Complex images. Some images, such as a heat map, may not have any other option but to use color. And there is a WCAG requirement that talks about this specifically about graphical objects. Parts of graphics required to understand the content, except when a particular presentation of graphics is essential to the information being conveyed. Essential definition, if it's removed, would it fundamentally change the information or functionality of the content? And information and functionality cannot be achieved in another way that would conform. There's rare cases where that's the issue, but a heat map would be an example of that exception. Now I'm going to get into some more examples. So for the next several examples, I'm using this fake data. This is a table with fake data for 12 months over 3 years of sales for the years 2022 through 2024. And this next example is a chart, a side-by-side bar graph that is showing this data, but it's failing because it's using only color alone in the differentiating sections of the side-by-side bar chart. And so I'm going to show you how you would fix that to make it accessible in this next example. So to fix a failure of a stacked bar chart with color contrast issues, you would add patterns, keeping in mind that you still have to meet color contrast ratios even within using patterns. So that's really important. For example, if you used red with black polka dots, that would not meet the color contrast ratio. And again, whenever you're using a legend that has, you're using patterns within your bar graph or chart, you want to make sure that your legend is large enough to show what patterns you're using with the little icons that show up next to that data set. So this is an example of a line graph that's using, again, three different similarly toned colors, kind of a beigey pink, a medium dark gray, and a lighter gray. And somebody who's colorblind might not be able to differentiate and might get confused with this line chart. And so a way you can fix that is by adding patterns to your line charts and then making your, oops, I keep on skipping, and then making your legend large enough to show what those patterns are for your chart titles. So one line we made with dots, another is a solid, and another one is a combination of lines and dots to clearly differentiate the difference between. So for supplemental information for your bar or for your line charts, one of the things that you can do, and again, this is something that I just think is a good practice to get into, is properly label your chart. So on the slide, I have an example of the sales chart from 2022 to 2024. It has the chart. The chart itself is not accessible, but to supplement and to make it accessible, you can provide some more information. So for example, underneath the chart, you could provide the text "See Appendix Table A" and hyperlink to Table A if it is in an appendix or it's on a different web page or wherever that content lives. Consider creating hyperlinks if the tables are found somewhere else, and then providing the Table A, sales 2024 to 2022 to 2024, data for figure 1. So tying it back to that figure within identifying it in the appendix or wherever you're linking it to. So now we'll talk about alternative text for graphs and charts. For context, ensure the image complements the surrounding text without repeating the content. Keep it brief, keep the description concise and essential, and make the description clear and easy to understand. When describing the image for context, in what way does the image connect to the surrounding text? You want to make sure you differentiate the content of the image from the text. Avoid repeating information that's found elsewhere. Make the image description short and to the point. Skip unnecessary details. Clarity, make sure the description is straightforward and easily comprehensible. Image alternative text. So the correct approach, you always want to make sure you're checking your spelling and grammar. Consider your audience. Is your terminology and your vocabulary understandable? Are acronyms understood? I know we love our acronyms with Connors and Extension. So would somebody who doesn't know what our acronyms are understand what we're saying if we're using them? Try to stay under 30 words if possible. In many cases, this is not possible for graphs and charts with heavy data. But if that's the case, you can always link to more information. Including all data is appropriate. If you don't have the exact data available, and Again, using maybe a table for supplemental information. Best practice would be that you are not guessing. The best option is that hard data is available in the text, in a table, or is labeled in the graph or chart. Spell out negative for negative numbers rather than using the symbol. Image alternative text. An incorrect approach is using text like graphic of or image of in the alt text. This is already implied to somebody using a screen reader or read out to them. It will create repeated words for someone using assistive technology. Don't be overly descriptive unless it's important to convey the meaning. And then don't give away test or exercise answers in the alternative text. It's a given. So supplemental, again, remember if you've added data, it can change the effort you need to put into alternative text. Alt text for just an image with no data would read pie chart of percent of sales for each month of 2024. January is 10%, February is 11%, March is 10%, April 11%, May 12%, June 23%, July 2%, August 5%, September 8%, October 2%, November 4%, December 2%. Or the alt text for the image if it's supplemental and the data is included in a table, as the example I've provided on this page with the month and sales data for January through December. Then you would just need to include the alternative text for the pie chart that says pie chart of percent of sales for each month of 2024, data included in table. So you're directing the user to the data that's included in the table, therefore not needing to make that chart or graph accessible on its own. I ran through that really quickly. I'm sure we'll probably have some questions. So I just want to highlight what the key takeaways are. Accessible charts and graphs are required. They're not optional. Color alone cannot communicate meaning. Contrast matters for readability. Simple design improves comprehension for everyone. Data tables are the fastest compliance solution, and good accessibility reduces risk and rework of your content. I'm going to put some resources up here. That color contrast analyzer tool that I was talking about, you can get that online. I will provide the link in the chat as well. It's vispero.com/color-contrast-checker. There's a good resource on complex images on the W3 website, and that is www.w3.org/WAI/tutorials/images/complex. Another great blog post that I came across, how to make charts and graphs accessible by PopeTech. And you can access that link at blog.pope.tech/2023/08/31 how-to-make-charts-and-graphs-more-accessible. And then beyond the chart, a guide to accessible data visualization is another good blog post that I found that's really helpful. And you can access that blog post at dubbot.com/dubblog/2024/charts-graphs. Those are some really great resources. And so now I am going to open it up for questions, and then I'm also going to give you a demonstration of that color analyzer tool that I was talking about. You take a look at the chat and see if anybody had any questions. Stop my share here. Does anyone have any questions before I give a demonstration of that analyzer tool? All right, so I'll share my screen again. I'll have to share my whole screen, I think, in order to be able to demonstrate this tool. And give me 1 second. Okay. I'm going to share my desktop. That should help me. Okay. Can everybody see the color contrast tool analyzer that I've opened alongside my PowerPoint here?
Yep.
Okay, so I'm going to skip back a few slides to, let's go to this example of a color failure stacked bar chart. So the nice thing about this tool is you can download it. It's free. It's just an app on your desktop. You can open it at any time and use it with anything you're working on, a website, a document, it doesn't matter. It's got these nice little color dropper tools. So I'm going to grab the little tool and I'm going to select the red color. And then I'm going to select the background color picker so I can see what the pink looks like next to it. And so color of pink and red actually has a 4.9 to 1 ratio, but it's telling me that for regular text under the WCAG rules standards that it would fail regular text. And so then if I were to check the, oops, bring my color analyzer back up. If I were to check the pink next to the kind of goldish color, it would tell me that I'm failing all the WCAG results for color contrast minimum. So these two colors side by side would not pass that color contrast. And so this is how you would actually use the tool while you're building your content. And so let me go to the next one here for an example. Pull back up my analyzer here. And so the nice thing that you can also do, let's see, I'm going to go here. So this is going to be what you're testing is the pattern itself. So I would test the red with, if I hover over, and it would select, well, it's really white, so I'll just select white. If I select the red with the white, everything passes within my color contrast analyzer. It's a 7 to 1 ratio. And so I can use the white polka dots on the red background. And doing that next to the pink, then because I'm doing a pattern in addition to the color, then it would make it pass that color contrast ratio because I've added an additional element for deciphering between the two. So that's why you want to use another element, the pattern, in addition to the color, because then it makes it less about the color contrast between the item right next to you. So that's an example of using the color contrast analyzer. Any questions about that? Okay, well, I'm going to stop recording then.
Multiple slides are shown. Color Alone Solutions Supplemental shows a pie chart next to a data table and narrative text as accessible alternatives. Labels compares a pie chart that uses only color with an accessible black and white version that uses data labels. Color Contrast Ratio displays a table with color combinations and their contrast ratios. Color Contrast for Text outlines WCAG requirements for regular and large text. Color Contrast for Text continued specifies required contrast ratios and shows text examples passing or failing in a red box. Color Contrast Text Failure Example shows a pie chart with poor color contrast and tool screenshots demonstrating failures. Color Contrast Solutions shows 3 pie charts illustrating solutions like changing colors or moving text labels outside the chart. Color Contrast Non-Text lists examples of non-text elements that require a 3 to 1 contrast ratio. Non-text failures shows a pie chart with muted colors and tool screenshots demonstrating how adjacent colors fail contrast requirements. Non-text color solutions shows a corrected pie chart with black borders added between each slice to improve contrast. Quickest fix, add data table shows a pie chart above a data table that presents the same information accessibly. Color exceptions lists situations where color contrast rules do not apply, such as for logos and supplemental images. Example shows a data table with fake sales data for 12 months over 3 years. Color Failure Stacked Bar Chart displays the data from the previous slide using muted colors that fail contrast requirements. Color Failure Stacked Bar Chart Add Patterns shows the same chart with patterns added to the bars to differentiate the data. Color Failure Line Graph shows a line graph with 3 lines in muted, similar colors. Color Failure Line Graph Add patterns shows the same line graph with different patterns added to the lines to make them distinguishable. Supplemental demonstrates how to make a chart supplemental by providing the data in a separate, linked table. Alternative text for graphs and charts gives best practices for writing alt text. Describing the image provides more detail on writing alt text. Image alternate text. Correct approach lists tips for writing good alt text. Image alternate text. Incorrect approach lists common mistakes to avoid in alt text. Supplemental shows how adding a data table simplifies the alt text requirement for a chart. Key takeaways summarizes the main points of the presentation. Resources lists hyperlinks for tools and articles on accessible charts. The presenter, Sarah Schaub, appears full screen against a backdrop of a Washington State University flag. The screen returns to the PowerPoint presentation, showing the resources slide. A small window for the Color Contrast Analyzer tool is open over the slide. The presenter navigates back to the color failure stacked bar chart slide and demonstrates using the color picker tool to check the contrast ratio between the red and pink bars. The presenter moves to the color failure stacked bar chart, add patterns slide and uses the color picker to show that the red and white colors in the new patterned bar pass the contrast requirements.